Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Ben Jealous.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Oh, come on. You all braved like hurricanes and tropical storms, nor'easters. Folks are complaining and say, who's ever heard of a hurricane hitting New York City? I'm like, who's ever heard of a hurricane where it's 40 degrees the next day? But thank you for being here, and thank you for your courage, both in the workplace and in your travel. And Bobby, thank you for that introduction. It's a real honor to be here today with all of you. Really appreciate the leadership of your fearless CEO, Celeste Berry. Proud to stand here today with all of us, brothers and sisters, in the fight for human rights in this country. Some of you may know the struggle for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender equality is near and dear to my heart. My brother Jason is transgender, and growing up faced discrimination and bigotry both for his color and for his gender. I stand before you today as someone who's deeply vested in the movement, but also as a leader of an organization with strong connections to the fight for LGBT equality. From its inception, the NAACP has always known that in order to have a friend, you've got to be a friend. That in order to win in a democracy, in the words of Fannie Lou Hamer, people have got to get together and work together. That we need to build big, diverse, and complex coalitions. As Martin Luther King told a mentor of mine years ago, if you're comfortable in your coalition is too small. And it's worked. A few weeks after the NAACP Board of Directors voted to endorse marriage equality from coast to coast, a few weeks after that, we held a march in New York City to protest racial profiling, or as they call it there, stop and frisk. When Giuliani was mayor, Mr. Diallo was killed. We said the stop and frisk program he had started was out of control. They were stopping and frisking about 80,000 or so people a year then. Last year, and back then, one of the reasons we said it was out of control is we said 90% of the people are innocent, 90% of the people are people of color, and 99.5% of them back then didn't have a gun. Now under Mayor Bloomberg, last year was 700,000 people. 90% innocent, 90% people of color, 99.9% now don't have a gun. 700,000 stops, 700 guns seized. And anywhere, in any universe other than politics, you would call that a failure. But he gets away with it. And so, in the days before the march, we held a press conference at the Stonewall Inn organized by 35 LGBT organizations who stood together to say it was wrong then and it's wrong now. As a good friend of mine, Ray Carey, the head of the task force, said, there was no rational reason to raid the Stonewall Inn in 1969, and there is no rational reason to stop Black and Latino young men in 2012 and frisk them simply for being who they are. Shared injustice, shared values, and with the help of our LGBT allies, we held the largest and most peaceful march down Fifth Avenue in decades. We expected 25,000 that day, 70,000 showed up. Now, there are some in this country who would argue that ours is a new alliance. Well, that depends on your definition of the word new. The NAACP and the LGBT movement have fought together for social justice since well before Bayard Rustin planned the March on Washington in 1963. He was an out gay Black hero who wrote the textbook on moving the masses for jobs and freedom. It was in the spirit of Bayard Rustin that the civil rights community came together in Washington in 2010 and moved 175,000 people down to the nation's capital for one nation working together. The most inclusive and affirming march for jobs and justice that our nation's capital has ever seen. Or as one of my youth and college leaders pointed out, we had a Chicano speaker, a gay speaker, and a student speaker, and that was just one guy who spoke at the march. And that's the way it should be. The coalition was effective not in spite of its diversity and the diversity of organizations involved, but because of it. Similarly, it was in the spirit of Bayard Rustin that we have stood shoulder to shoulder to move for passage of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. And we will see it pass just like it took us over 10 years, but we got the Matthew Shepard, James Byrd Hate Crimes Act passed. And it is in the spirit of Bayard Rustin that NAACP state conferences, including ours here in Maryland, are standing shoulder to shoulder with LGBT groups in Maine, in Minnesota, in Washington State, and right here in Maryland, pushing for marriage equality right now. We are vocal and we are uncompromising on the fact that civil marriage is a civil right and a matter for civil law, and discrimination by judges against people for what they are is as wrong now as it was then when this state said that my parents couldn't get married here because my father was white and my mother's black. This afternoon, I want to share with you my own personal story about choosing at a young age to know that the best antidote to hatred is love. I was born in the village of Carmel, California. That 1 square mile hamlet, there was one other black boy my age. His name is Jason. He lived across the street. His mom was my mom's best friend, his sister, my sister's best friend. And from the age of 6 months on, me 6 months, him a year, we have been best friends. He's truly my brother in every way except by birth. And since the age of 4, brother is the only word that we've ever used to describe each other. Part of being brothers has always been our willingness to adopt each other's fight as our own. At first, his fight, my fight, was clearly the same fight. We were 2 black boys in one little town, and when we moved 2 towns over, when we were about 5 or 6, both our families still living in close proximity, when we would walk through the 5 and dime, we would be tracked every inch by the store manager while our white friends ran in and out. And we knew that we were both being discriminated against because we were 2 curly-haired brown boys in a very white town. But years later, some of those white friends who had even stood up with us to the store clerk and others who discriminated against us because of our race decided to target Jason because he liked to wear wigs and dresses and makeup and introduce himself to you as a young Diana Ross. He was quite good at it, let me tell you. I would sell tickets to the shows and keep half the money, so I was quite throw on his roller skates and skate down the intersection. It was quite a lot of fun, but it perturbed some folk. And they tried to convince me that this time I should let their hatred for him be his fight, not mine. And I made a choice right then and there that if you pick a fight with my brother, you've picked a fight with me. These are the realities that pundits ignore when they seek to stereotype the black community, black leadership, or black clergy on the issue of LGBT equality. I mean, just for once, I would like somebody to answer the question, well, what does the white community think about what the straight community is doing? Tell me, Bill O'Reilly, please. can't draw a line between somebody's race and their sexual orientation. It just can't be done. The national media tends to exaggerate the divisions between black civil rights and LGBT institutions. This tendency is what caused Bayard Rustin to remain a marginalized figure in mainstream history of civil rights, since historians just didn't think that an out black gay man fit the narrative. This tendency is what sort of inspired the media to fixate on and scapegoat the black community when Prop 8 went down, ignoring the fact that the percentage of black people of the overall population was less than the margin of loss. And of course, then that kept them from talking about the fact that the NAACP had supported it, that the NAACP joined the lawsuit to invalidate it, and so forth. And this is why the media really never quite knew what to do with the Matthew Shepard, James Byrd hate crime act. They could only seem to talk about it as one or the other, in the light of the Matthew Shepard case or in the light of the James Byrd case, rather than recognizing what the very point of the law was, that a hate crime is a hate crime is a hate crime. We don't care what hate you claim. The issue is that your hate motivated you to lynch someone. And it really drove them crazy when James Anderson was lynched in Mississippi. Did they lynch him because he was gay? Did they lynch him because he was black? Do we really care? They lynched a man. Focus on that. But certainly, they did notice when the NAACP board came out in support of marriage equality, and they are now starting to talk about this issue for what it is, an issue of equal protection, protected by the 14th Amendment to the Constitution itself, no more, no less. And they are beginning to understand what we have known all along, that the LGBT struggle and the black struggle for civil rights in this country are both integral and inseparable parts of the great struggle for human rights and human dignity in our country. You know, the biggest thing that we need to focus on isn't simply the media's failure to recognize our common struggle, but quite frankly, that too often we, enlightened as we are, fail to recognize the commonality of our struggles. For 103 years, the NAACP and our diverse range of allies have run with the baton first set in motion by the Great American Revolution. Our nation moves closer to being one nation when we do three things: expand access to education for all, expand access to financial opportunity for all, and expand access to the ballot box and the offices of political power for all. As we expand each of these, our nation is moving closer to its own ideals. As we allow any of these to be attacked and degraded, we permit the very essence of our nation to be attacked and degraded. As Frederick Douglass observed in our speech, our composite nationality. Every nation has a destiny, a nation that is defined by its character, a character which is usually defined by its geography. And our nation, set between two oceans, connecting it to the rest of the world, and two borders, north and south, connecting it to two nations of very different races. Our nation's destiny is to be the most perfect example of human unity that the world has ever seen. In short, our work, the work of the civil and human rights movement, is to empower America to be America, to be the most perfect example of human unity the world has ever seen. And that is why, whether a child is bullied by a student because of her sexual orientation or gender identity, or mistreated by a teacher or principal because of his race, our Coalition for Human Rights must stand together in each case. Because no child who is mistreated at school because of what they are has fair access to a high-quality education. That is why, whether it is fighting to end discrimination against LGBT people at work or black people at the bank, our coalition for human rights must stand strong together. Because when you or your community is the target of any ism in the marketplace, ending discrimination is as important as job creation. And ending the virus of hatred anywhere requires that we end it everywhere. And that is why, in this moment when our nation is in the midst of the greatest wave of voter suppression legislation since before the creation of the NAACP, let me make this very clear. Goodman, Cheney, Schwerner, Medgar Evers, Harry and Harriet Moore in Florida, blown up 60 years ago last Christmas while leading a voter registration drive. The laws that those people were seeking to undo when they were assassinated in the civil rights movement 50, 60 years ago were put in place 50, 60, 70 years before that. In the past year, we've seen more states pass more laws, pushing more voters out of the ballot box. Just in one cycle, one state lobbying cycle, than we've seen in any cycle, in any 2-year period in the past century. This attack may not be a rational response to voter fraud. Pennsylvania, when we were suing them to overturn voter ID, they were forced to admit that not only had they never convicted anybody of impersonating a voter, they hadn't even ever investigated a case. In South Carolina, it was a little bit more profane. The governor came out there, listed 900 dead people who had voted, ordered her state board of education to investigate. That was page 1. Now, page 23, 6 weeks later, State Board of Elections comes back from investigating, and it's buried that they didn't find any cases. They said, Governor Haley, we couldn't find any dead person who voted. She said, why not? They said, because they were dead. Dead people don't vote, Governor. Newsflash. And so in this moment, when it seems like all of our rights are under attack everywhere all the time, a woman's right to choose is under attack. Affirmative action is back in the Supreme Court under attack. The right of people to migrate to this country, the children who've been raised here to be treated with dignity in our country, to benefit from their education, under attack. It shouldn't be surprising that the right to vote is under attack too. Because the right to vote is the right upon which your ability to defend all of your other rights is leveraged. You can knock that leg out, it makes it easier to go after everything else. So we must recognize what the anti-voting rights extremists recognize. When they come after the right to vote, they make it easier to come after women's rights, to come after LGBT inclusion, to come after marriage equality, to come after affirmative action. If they understand that it's in the interest of all the groups who oppose our individual classes of rights and movement aspirations, if they understand that they all have a vested interest in suppressing our vote, then we need to understand that we all have an interest in protecting everybody's vote. And I'm proud today to report to you that the NAACP is rising to this moment of voter suppression, not just in defeating voter suppression bills state by state across the country, but this year we have registered 3.5 times as many people as we did in 2008. 445,000 and counting. And we will move to the polls more than 2.5 times as many people as we moved to the polls in 2008, over 1.2 million. We do this with vigor and urgency because we understand that we are at a moment of risk of losing much of what we have gained and what we stand to gain. I stand here today in the spirit of those who have stood for freedom and justice and equality and pushed all of us towards this moment, in this epic battle, to hold on and expand the great moral center of our country. We are in this battle we are in this battle against foes who seem more inspired by our nation's dim past than its bright future. And although these forces are equipped with almost limitless resources, the ability to influence our vote with no transparency, unedited mass media echo chambers, and even lies created to hurl fear and hate often when there is despair and uncertainty. We can never allow ourselves to be discouraged, distracted, nor divided, because our history has taught us that we can never win the battle for justice, equality, and freedom when we allow ourselves to be defined or limited or kept in our individual silos. But that we can emerge victorious when we unite for the common good of all. We emerge victorious when we build large, diverse coalitions who dare to dream bold dreams and win big victories. So let us move forward in unity with the common vision and determination to build the United States that we dream for all of our children. A United States where all of us can get a good job, where all of us can obtain a quality education, where all of us can have access to health care, access even to clean air and clean water. A United States in which opportunities are afforded to all. And most importantly, an America in which no matter a person's race, creed, gender, or sexual orientation, she or he can live in a country free from discrimination, free from hatred, free from violence, where basic human rights and dignity are respected. An America where my brother Jason and people like him can feel comfortable on the playground or the workplace or the schoolroom. As I close and take my seat, let us all recall the words of the great Harvey Milk, who said, "It takes no compromising to give people their rights. It takes no money to respect the individual. It takes no survey to remove repression." Let us remember those words and carry them forward in our common fight for justice, equality, and freedom, and on to victory here in Maryland, Minnesota, Maine, and Washington State. Thank you, and God bless.